So hi, it's early for me to read, but I realized I've been talking more during my reading my book, and I thought it might be better if I just did a separate live and had a chat and answered questions, because I've noticed some questions popping up in the chat while I'm reading. So I thought I'd do a live here and then do a brief one on Facebook too. I'm not really going to save these or anything. I'm just going to, I might put them on my Patreon or something, but I'll add them to the stories. And so I'm just basically here to say hi to everyone. I've noticed a lot of questions in the chat box while I've been reading. So if you had questions or there was stuff that you wanted to talk about, I'm here for that right now. And then later on, maybe in about 2 hours, I'll probably read the next chunk of the plague. It kind of makes my throat hurt to read for, half an hour to an hour. So I've kind of been skipping a night here and there. Hi. So, yeah. Any questions or anything that you've been trying to ask during the times I've been reading, I guess bring them on now. One of the big things I've noticed is that the book, I mean, it's about the Black Plague, so there's not a whole lot of overlap with what's going on now as far as social distancing and people staying away from each other. With the Black Plague, it's spread by fleas, so they did a lot of cleaning. They're doing a lot of fumigation and trying to take care of corpses, but they're not, so they don't have to stay away from each other necessarily. So that's kind of a difference. Pneumonic plague is one where it's airborne. It's spread by your breath. So when you read about historic accounts of pneumonic plague, you're reading something a lot more similar to what we have going on right now. Anything you read about, some of the great plagues, 1349 in England and Europe, you're reading about a disease being spread by a vector insect. So fleas. When you read about things like pneumonic plague, the Justinian plague is another one, smallpox, influenza, these are diseases that are a lot more similar to what we're having right now. What's up, Kane? So, there's some historic parallel, and Camus was writing about the bubonic plague, but not at this point in the book anyway, about the pneumonic plague, which is spread by airborne particles. So at this point, if you're experiencing a bubonic outbreak, you're not kept away from other people. You're just supposed to get rid of their belongings, because they could have fleas, infected fleas. That's why they're killing the stray dogs and cats in that book that I'm reading. I can't remember which book it is. I think it's Defoe's Plague in London, which is from the 1600s. That time, bubonic did end up mutating and becoming the pneumonic plague, which is spread by breath. And after a certain point, they did have a full quarantine order. They started locking sick people into their houses, that kind of thing. During the Spanish flu, social distancing, masks, staying home, all that kind of thing. Because again, if it's airborne, if it's passed by your breath or your cough, it's a little different than a disease that's spread by fleas or something like that. There was another example I wanted to give, and I can't remember it. Tuberculosis. They called it the White Plague for a very long time. And similarly, if one person in the house got it, almost everyone got it, because you're breathing out the bacillus. You're breathing it out. And before antibiotics and before the kind of medical advances we have now, it was just a slow, slow death. When you see signs that say no spitting, you know, you see pictures of people wearing masks in large groups, it's because of TB, because tuberculosis. They didn't understand what it was or how it was spread for a really long time, but it's another one that can be airborne. And so isolating people who have it was part of the solution, sending them to sanitariums, sending them to basically these isolated areas, these little spas outside of town. I was reading about the Justinian plague. The Justinian plague was apparently airborne, and also body fluids. They closed down public baths. People were asked to stay home. Of course, they weren't wearing masks really in those days, but they were covering their faces. There's some carvings and writings from the time that discuss covering your face, covering your mouth, not being close to people who are sick, not being close to people who are not sick, because people could get sick and drop dead any minute. So all through history we have these different kind of approaches depending on how something is spread and how quickly people figure out how it's spread. Dogs. One of the things that I've noticed is that there's stages. There's always stages in every plague. There's steps that society sort of goes through. And I made a little list. This is how I've spent my free time. All this free time. I made a little list of kind of stages of society's behavior and response. And I'm just going to find it here really quick and read off a little bit of it to you, if I can find it. Where the hell did I put it? There we go. Okay, so stage 1 would be omens, I guess you would call them. Things that are actually warning signs, but that most people don't notice or recognize as a warning sign. So, in the book I've been reading, it's the rats dying off. This happens a lot with bubonic plague. Only some rats, usually the big Norway rats, are undamaged by it. But local rats, land rats, town mice and rats are affected by it and can die from it. So they had this mass rat die-off. This happened in London in 1347 and 1348. It happened in the 1600s during that plague outbreak. It happened all the way back in the Justinian plague and some of the earliest plagues recorded in history, where not necessarily rats, but some animal, some local animal, dying off in mass, visibly to the people. So this is an omen. They used to call it an omen. It was just a bad sign, like something bad is coming. And now we know that it's because some of these animals are affected by these illnesses. So these are the omens. That, or, you know, everybody's suddenly coughing, everybody's suddenly tired, or people not showing up to work, or, you know, that part of a horror movie where you see, like, think of like The Crazies, where there's a few people who are acting very strangely and are not examined, like they're not being examined, they're just, something's wrong with them, but we don't know what's wrong with them. In Wuhan, it was an ophthalmologist who noticed a high increase in people who had eye irritation and a fever going on to have severe respiratory disorders. And he started to post about this online and was reprimanded by the government for spreading rumors. So Dr. Lee, definitely hero, spread the word. He saw the omen and he recognized it for what it was. In every plague, in every pandemic or pestilence, this is like a common thing. There's always some people who realize what these things mean and try to spread the word, and then doctors eventually catch up. The quicker they catch up, the better the chances there are that things will be okay. Once they realize that there's a contagious disease that needs to be contained, that's the end of the first stage of a plague. The second stage is them trying to convince people in power to do the right thing to contain it, or stop it, or treat it. This is usually the determiner of whether we have 1349 happen, whether we have Ebola happen, or whether we have the coronavirus. If people who are in charge are really concerned with public health and safety, as in the book we're reading, they were very quickly convinced. You get a containment. You get a severe containment. People's rights are infringed on. It's very difficult. A lot of times those governments see it as a chance to seize power, which is unpleasant. I look at Hungary right now. I think they've just made their, quote, president a dictator for life or something. Putin has just given himself 36 more years at the helm. It's just a bad response. But things like local governments, mayors, governors, shutting down towns or businesses in towns, closing down things that are likely to spread the plague. Like in the book we're reading, the town gates have simply been shut. They don't want it to get beyond that town at all, which is a reasonable response. And it's not really seizing more power than they have in that place and time. Mayors here saying everything is closed, or governors saying everything is closed except for absolute essentials, for the time that it takes this disease to become known. That's reasonable. I could say things about, the economic impact, but really, if you're alive, you'll always be able to make more money. There are really vulnerable populations that need more help, but thinking on a societal level, if you're thinking from the top down, if you're one of those public officials, your first response to any report of a plague should be to respond immediately with public health funds and access. Everyone gets access. Everyone is tested. If you have a test, those things. So it's the second stage is the doctors convincing those in charge to do something about it. If they succeed, a plague is stopped. Ebola is contagious. We had one case come to the United States, and because the government response was immediate, swift, and decisive, everybody coming from those areas was either quarantined or turned away. Everybody. It didn't matter if you were a citizen or not. It was not a racist law. It was just if you had been in those areas, in those regions, you were not coming here without being in enforced medical quarantine. So we ended up with 2 healthcare workers who caught and recovered from Ebola. That was the extent of the crisis in the United States. Hi, Kook. A lot of people in the regions where it came from tried to do the same, but by the time they were attempting to do it, it was too late because they were the original area where it was spreading. Quarantine and shutting down travel locally was the only way to fix it. So you have these people who are worried about business and tourism and their personal money, and they want to profit off this somehow, and they're in charge, and sometimes the doctors win, sometimes the scientists win, and it's cut short. Look at Ebola in the United States. Sometimes they lose, and it spreads. If you look at SARS, H1N1, and the coronavirus, you see people taking advantage of the situation and not being concerned with public health. If they lose, now we have a pestilence, a plague, a pandemic. The third stage is public response. Now, by now, word will have leaked out to some people who will be already self-isolating. They will be possibly withdrawing. They call it bugging in, staying home, avoiding crowds, avoiding people, trying to figure out what the disease is, how they can not catch it, that kind of thing. But the vast majority of the public just now become aware because of these things that are being put in place. And there will be businessmen, there will be people who are worried about traveling, personal money, their friends and family's safety who are at a distance, things like that. There'll also be a lot of people who do panic, no matter how calmly news is presented or how strongly warnings are made. This is very dangerous, this could be deadly, please don't leave your home. There are people who will pack everything the fuck up, get in their private jet, get in their car, get in their yacht, get in their boat, get on foot, and start leaving areas that have heavy infection. It's normally the rich fleeing to small towns, to the countryside. People with money try to escape. And the problem with that is that disease doesn't care how much money you have. You're bringing pestilence with you when you try to escape to a place. You're bringing that disease with you there. If it's not you directly, it is somebody else who's doing the exact same thing you're doing, and it is a panic response. Fight or flight is real. This is flight. So you have these people who have the ability to running, and everywhere they run to, they bring it with them. Which is why in the book I'm reading, the town gates are locked. No one can leave. It doesn't matter how much money you have or who you are, how much influence. Fuck you, you're staying. And lockdown orders that don't include a shelter in place or a, don't travel, stay at home, essentials only sort of component allow for things like a bunch of kids to go party in Florida and then leave Florida for the entire country and spread it. It allows people from a big city where there's an outbreak to run to small towns and islands and places that are isolated nearby and bring it with them. It allows for vacationers on a beach in Florida to go home to Michigan and Minnesota and Iowa and Nebraska and bring it with them. And these places are less able to handle the medical needs of that many people. So when these people bring the plague and spread the plague with them, and remember, this isn't malicious. They're not trying to kill everybody in the small towns. They're not trying to kill Nebraska. They just are afraid. They were on vacation. They were in Florida. They were in San Francisco or New York or wherever they were. They weren't home. And they're trying to get home, or they're trying to get to a safe place. This is a human response of just fear. They're afraid. So it's a natural human thing, and it's one of the stages. It always happens. At this point, poor people start to just die. The rich people are fleeing, they're getting some medical care if they're sick, they're dying too, but mostly it's the poor that start dying, and they die without notice. The homeless, the indigent, those without any medical access. If you look at, I know some people who live in the northern Appalachians, sort of isolated, and yes, this has found its way into their communities, and yes, they are dying, and there is no medical access there at all. They're dying at home. They're dying without being tested. They're dying without... There's no country doctor that visits your house anymore. The insurance companies have made sure that doesn't happen. So the poor people just start dying. Now, the next stage after all of this is containment. We've had mild containment up till now, where people, the people in charge have tried, mitigation. They've tried to make it less likely to spread, but now it gets serious. There may be real quarantines, there may be lockdowns, there may be shelter-in-place orders, or everything closing. But at this point, there are still chances for a cremation, a funeral, saying goodbye to a loved one, even if you can't see them die because you're not allowed to visit the hospital. Even if you can't have a gathering of a funeral, you are allowed to pick up their cremated remains. You are allowed to have them buried. Body disposal is still functioning. Gossip is huge. And even before social media, especially before social media, gossip was massive. It was believed for a long time that Jews poisoning the wells was how the Black Plague was spread. This was believed to the point where many people were killed because they thought that's how the plague was spread. And I mean, it's fleas. It's a flea bite that spreads it. So misinformation and disinformation become more common. We are very lucky to have social media and the internet because you can debunk a lot of this stuff now, and it takes away a lot of the terror of not knowing what's happening. At this point, too, there are still eggs and bread, milk. These things are still at markets. You can still get food. You can still get enough food to even store some for later. You can gear up, to sort of be isolated. This is how Daniel Defoe, survived the Great Plague of London, and how he wrote the book about the Plague of London was he holed up in his house and laid in as much supplies as he could and stayed there. He watched everything out his window. He only left the house occasionally if something big was happening. And he did that to dispel rumors, to see if rumors were true or not. So this is, a stage that we're in right now. This is the stage we are in right now, where places that are resistant to mitigation and efforts to combat it are starting to realize that, yes, their people are dying. Poor people are definitely dying. Rich people are definitely traveling, moving around, trying to escape and spreading it. We can still buy milk, even though it's maybe rationed or hard to find. You can get toilet paper. You can still pick up the cremated remains of someone that died. That's the stage we're at. So we're riding up to the top. We're just below the peak, I guess, is the best way to put it. As we hit the peak, it kicks into gear. Doctors are not sleeping. They're not functioning at their best. We're beginning to come into this stage. Nurses and doctors don't have enough equipment to work with. People who run grocery stores, farmers, food producers, medicine producers, caregivers, people who are the essential workers and the necessary workers start to get sick. Now, at this point, almost everyone is either sick, taking care of someone who is sick, or completely hiding, isolating themselves completely. During this time, you might have looters, some violence, like that guy in Pennsylvania that shot someone for coughing. People start to react from panic. It's no longer fear now. We have actual panic. Media does not incite panic, by the way. It has nothing to do with what the media says, because these panics have occurred in every plague throughout history before there was a media. Rumors will spread, and it doesn't matter if it's the year 600 or the year 2020. Rumors will spread, and there will be some panic. Looting is dangerous. It always has been in a plague or a pandemic, because the house that's being broken into could be a house that's harboring infection. With a disease like bubonic plague, you would have people stealing fabrics and bedclothes and, goods, and a lot of them had fleas in them that were infected, so dangerous. These days, or with pneumonic plague or the flu, you're not smallpox. You don't want to loot someone's house. You don't want to break into someone's house, because what if someone there is sick? Now you're sick. So looting is a good way to die. Looting a store, that's inevitable. Those things are inevitable. They probably won't happen in as big number these days because we do have social media. We can tell each other, hey, look, there's milk available here. Oh, hi, I have eggs, I have chickens. Who wants some? I'll trade you for this or that. We have the ability to communicate with each other instantly and without face-to-face contact. So it's a lot safer now, actually, than it was before social media. At the point where things start to break down, the supply chain starts to break down, this is when the military, police, and citizen groups start to step in. You might see curfews or travel restrictions. Rationing can happen. The National Guard coming out to help distribute supplies is a first step in this chain of control. It's not ever been permanent control from any plague that I'm aware of. They simply can't keep it up because the military, the way that they're living is highly conducive to spread of the disease. So at this point also you'll start to see sick people being kept warehoused. This is like Wuhan building that hospital in 10 days. That was a warehouse for people who were probably going to die. They may see a doctor there. It might be the only chance they get to see a doctor because, again, the doctors are way overworked at this point. They'll be calling in retired doctors, army doctors, people with a tiny bit of medical training, anyone they can to help. And at this point, the mass graves, the dead, are not being buried or cremated individually anymore. There is no saying goodbye. If someone is gone, they are gone. If they go to that quarantined hospital, if they go to a hospital, you can assume that they are gone for the duration, if not dead. A lot of people do recover from this, but it's with heavy medical support. And the longer we go into this, the longer we're going to have, or the less access we're going to have to the good medical care. Because, again, the supply chain breaking down is a big deal. There was a drug that was used for Ebola, which is helping some people recover from this. Remildion, I think it's called. Remildion, I can't remember the name of it. If anyone knows it, type it in the comments. Now, it seems to be helping, unlike an antibiotic and a malaria drug. I don't know why that's a thing, but the Ebola drug keeps your capillaries from bursting, basically. So it keeps some of the organ damage from happening that's killing people. It's in testing. It's not a thing, but it's being prescribed a lot in testing because we don't have anything to treat this with. So at some point, the supply chain breaks down. Now, at this point, some people have recovered. They consider themselves immune. They start working to help. We start replacing essential services. We start replacing our supply chain. People have gotten sick and gotten better, gotten sick and become disabled from it and stuck in their houses, dead, or have completely lost the thread of the social contract. Now, in previous epidemics and plagues and such, there were a lot more people who sort of lost the thread. They would be fucking in the graveyard. They would be dancing naked under the moon. They would be stabbing people and playing dice with their teeth. You just, think of every horror movie you've seen, and you've got that apocalyptic post-plague mayhem. I think that's unlikely with this because of social media, because of the internet itself. As long as the internet is going, I think that our ability to contact and communicate with each other is going to really stave off a lot of that really cool post-apocalyptic bondage gear kind of bullshit. Of course you can still wear that when you go to the grocery store, but we're not Mad Max. We can talk to each other in a way that wasn't possible when those movies were first made, when other plagues happened. And then we reach the point of past peak, where people are dead, recovered, or have isolated themselves well enough to avoid the first wave. Now, this happened during the Spanish flu, the Kansas flu. People isolated well enough that they did not get sick until the second wave, and the second wave was much deadlier than the first. I don't know if that will happen this time. I'm not an epidemiologist, I don't know, but there is always a second and third wave as people come out of seclusion and back into the world and are exposed to it for the first time. It's hoped that any virus will mutate and become less deadly over time. So the hope is that those people who have isolated long enough my partner who had a bone marrow transplant, we won't be unisolating until it seems as if this disease is less deadly to people with his condition. It has to mutate, or there has to be a vaccine, or we can't come out of hiding, because his risk of death is really high from it. Also to be pointed out is that medical workers are some of the hardest hit. Even now I know that in this current pandemic, the death rate for medical workers is something like 20%. For everyone else, it's about 3 to about 6%, I think. But for medical workers, it's 20%. They're getting such a heavy hit of the virus that they're just dying. Losing medical workers, if you lose one medical worker, you lose 10 patients. That's just how it is. They are really the front line. So then the second wave comes. You know, things relax, things are coming back. Many people have recovered. The second wave will hit. People who were not exposed before go through the same process as that entire first wave did. They will try to deny it, they will try to flee, they will hoard, they will hide, they will spread it. There will be rumors and gossip again. It's like the whole thing over again, but a little less intense. Now, at some point during all this, the rich people become no different from the poor. Remember at the beginning I said the poor are dying. The poor are already dying. The poor are already dying of starvation and cold and hypothermia and all these other diseases, and now this adds to it. But at some point, because of this, money doesn't help anymore. The rich are no different. Those who ran away to rural areas are just as fucked as everyone who lived there to begin with, because there is less medical care in rural areas. There are less ventilators in bumfuck Ozark than there are in New York City, and that is a fact. Per person. I don't even mean in general. I mean per person there are less of them. So at some point money can buy nothing. Money cannot buy a doctor. Money can't buy a ventilator. Money can't even buy you a sleeping bag in the hallway of a hospital. Money no longer puts you above people without it. And at that point, society changes. And if you look at plagues throughout history, every time a plague has hit and become pandemic, the major changes to society include the fall of empires, the labor movement, the fall of monarchies, a shift between the ruling and working class, guillotines on the streets. An entire city, London, burned in 1666. The entire city burned in 1666. So, in 1349, peasants gained land rights. I mean, these are things that are necessary for the world to go on after. And they happen whether the elite like it or not, whether or not a rich guy who's being backed by big pharma cares and is interested and wants to be in charge. Doesn't matter if that guy's in charge. The societal changes come from a shift in the perspective of the population that remains. And it just happens. It isn't something that has to be forced, although strikes and general strikes and rent strikes and all those kind of things definitely push it faster. It just happens. It just happens. The restructuring of society happens. In this case, it might be better global communication. It might be the fall of a lot of right-wing dictators and sort of controlling governments that are fascistic. They cannot maintain. They cannot shoot the virus. This is not a war. It is not a war. It is a public health crisis. And calling it a war and acting like it's a war and hiding statistics and seizing power in the moment, all of these things are doomed to failure. China and Hungary and the United States have all responded in ways that are not going to stop what's coming. After the second wave, there may be another third wave. I mean, this is the dance. If you've read that article, The Hammer and the Dance, you know what I'm talking about. You have that, the hammer dropping and bringing those infection rates down, and then people easing up, and you dance. It gets up a little higher, you crack down again. It gets up a little higher, you crack down again. These smaller waves start to come. Now, by this time, if we have done it right, we have bought the medical system enough time for a vaccination, a treatment that works, adequate medical procedures and devices and workers to care for people who are getting sick. At this point, the pandemic can be considered over. Even though there will be waves of it, it can be considered over because it's no longer a major health threat to everyone. Now, there's a pause. There's like a civilization pauses after and at the very end of every pestilence. It's very sobering. You've lost people. Everyone has lost someone, at least one person, many people sometimes. This is very sobering. It's very disturbing. It changes your view of how the world works. There's survivor's guilt for those of us who do make it. I'm not saying I will make it. I don't know. But the people who do make it often have survivor's guilt, and it can be very harsh. It's a very difficult thing to live with. Some people may feel an extreme amount of guilt for things that they did against their own better nature just to survive. The trauma of knowing so many people are sick, so many people are dying or suffering, that there's some people who care about the world and all the people in it, and have a trauma response to knowing that, yes, the poor are dying, the homeless are sleeping in a parking lot in Vegas, or North Korea is just shooting people who cough. Like, knowing this stuff is in its own right, it's a traumatic experience. Even if all you did was stay home and watch Netflix and do fine, you are going to have a traumatic experience from this. And that's okay. It's okay to feel guilty because you had it better than others. It's okay to feel ashamed that you did something you wouldn't normally do just to survive. It's fine to feel that grief and loss, and it's fine to feel the trauma. It's a collective thing, and it is where those changes, those massive changes in civilization really stem from. And then some time passes, and the books are written, the art is displayed, the personal recollections are shared. There are still great-grandmothers I know who, my great-grandmother talked about the Spanish flu. She talked about World War I, World War II, the Spanish flu, polio. We've all got at least one older relative who remembers polio and remembers no swimming in the summer and no ice cream stands and kids being paralyzed and iron lungs and all of it. We've all got at least one, grandparent or great-grandparent who remembers measles and mumps making you sterile for the rest of your life, and measles could kill the little babies. And some of us, my age, have great-grandparents who remember the Spanish flu, and you didn't know why it killed people. They didn't even know. They just knew that one day their legs would hurt, they would be tired, and then they'd have a fever, and then they'd be dead. And it was quick. And it spread. Everybody in the house got sick. So, it's not that we forget. It's that in our daily life we forget. And we get careless again. And we start to think that these are a thing of the past and it can't happen again. And I mean, we know better now. We do have, the internet to help us remember now. But the books and the art and the personal reminiscences and the discussions about it, I think that everybody right now should be keeping a journal. Keep a journal on paper. Keep a journal online. Do these live things like I'm doing. Talk about what's happening to you, what you've seen, what you've done, what's going on around you. Try to connect with people. Stay connected with people. If you find something that sounds outlandish on the internet, look further, look for more sources, look for things that say it's not true. Try to educate yourself about rumor and innuendo and fear and all of that. And I mean, the number of people I've seen post something about not drinking cold water, for example, is a very good example of a rumor. I mean, it's a rumor. Somebody somewhere wrote that and thought it would help people, but it's irrelevant. This is a virus. This is a virus that doesn't live in your throat. This is a virus that infects your upper respiratory tract and spreads and fucks your lungs. One thing I have read, and you can look this up, is that lying prone, if you are sick, lying on your face down, make a nest out of pillows, lay with your face down, allows you to have more tidal air volume in your lungs. And if you are sick, that may help ease the symptoms. It may help keep you from needing a ventilator, needing an ICU or something, but even that could be wrong. I mean, just because I've read it from doctors or from, people working clinically doesn't mean that they are not wrong. This is unprecedented and nothing's tested. We're back in the age before antibiotics and before vaccines right now, because there is no antiviral or vaccine or treatment for this. Novel means new. So new that we have no idea what to do with it and we have no immunity for it. And the treatments we have do work for most people, but not all. So age, again, isn't a factor, even though that's been said a lot, like it's the boomer doomer or whatever, but it's not. It's not. If you don't have good health care, really good preventative health care, you don't know if you have an underlying condition. And that's the bottom line, is that if you don't have access to full yearly physicals, checkups, if you don't know what's going on inside your body because you don't have access to health care, you don't know if this thing can kill you or not. One thing I have read that seems useful, and again, this goes back to all my readings about things like pneumonic plague and other airborne and droplet-borne diseases, is that a mask, even if it's just a bandana, a scarf, fabric, anything that covers your face, will protect other people from you. Now, it won't protect you from everything, because of course your eyes are exposed. It's not going to filter everything out that's coming in the air. But if you are infected, and you can be infected with no symptoms, it contains your breath to you. So covering your face right now is a really good idea. If it's incorrect, if it doesn't do anything, it has not done you any harm. Don't go out and buy a bunch of N95 masks, because those aren't what I'm talking about. Those are to protect the wearer, the medical worker, from other people's breath. I'm talking about protecting other people from your breath. So if you're infected and you're an asymptomatic carrier of this illness, covering your face can protect other people from you. And it's a considerate thing to do. Whether that mask is layers of scarf, a folded bandana, an actual fabric N99. We have had those for about a year now, because Phil's doctor gave them to us when he had no immune system from his chemo. So that's what we've been wearing. But even just a surgical mask or anything that will keep your breath confined to your space is a good way to protect other people. And if everyone was doing that, other people would be protected from them. So think of that as a way to protect the people around you, not yourself. It's a good idea. But of course, again, there's a shortage of those supplies. So make your own at home. Wear a scarf, wear a bandana, put on your balaclava, go free the North, occupy, whatever the fuck. But, wearing the thing is probably a good idea. Gloves are useless unless you're using them right. If you're touching doors, door handles of the store, or the touchpad with your glove, and then you put your credit card in your pocket, you've just put all those germs onto the credit card and then into your pocket. If you're touching public things with gloves, don't touch your own things with that same glove. You're carrying the germs. Change your gloves or wear one on one hand and touch everything dirty with that hand. The other hand, no glove, everything clean is touched by this hand. So my credit card is in this hand, and then I touch the touchpad with my gloved hand. This hand doesn't touch me at all. At all, doesn't touch me. It's gloved. It's dirty. It's a dirty hand. This hand doesn't touch anything else at all. Doesn't touch anything else at all. It's a clean hand. It only touches me and my things. That's one good way to do it. I've been gloving up every time I go out anywhere. I've only gone out once in the last 2 weeks. But I've been doing it for cross-contamination control. So I've been using gloves and removing and regloving and sanitizing between uses and not touching, not cross-contaminating. You can go online, you can go to the Red Cross and take a cross-contamination class, which will talk about fomites. I think it costs $25 to take the outsider class. Yeah, bleach with water and to rinse your gloves. The problem with that is that if you're rinsing nitrile and latex gloves in bleach, you're degrading the molecular structure of the glove. So using dishwasher gloves and doing that would be fine, like those big yellow gloves. That would be totally fine. But for fine-handed surgical gloves, they're not rinsable. You can't wash and reuse those. You have to throw those away when they're contaminated. Rinsing them in bleach isn't doing much. If you carried a bucket of soapy water in your car and you simply did one glove for everything dirty, bare hand for everything clean, and when you got to your car, use that clean hand to open your car door, take off the glove, your dirty hand, and now wash your hands in that bucket of soapy water, you'll actually have done a whole lot more than using bleach, believe it or not. I know you can all look up how this virus is constructed. It's fatty molecules holding together the protein. The fatty molecules that hold it together are destroyed by soap. Contact with soap will destroy them. So washing your hands with soap will work. It will clean it. Yeah, you can use the nitrile with bleach one time. You shouldn't feel safe enough to touch your own belongings with a glove that has any more than you would if you had bare hands. Your gloves don't make your hands any cleaner at all. If you have a glove on, that glove immediately consider it filthy. Your whole hand is filthy because everything you're touching with that gloved hand contaminates the glove. So cross-contamination classes, Red Cross, I would look them up. They're not that expensive. You can find a lot of the information online through the Red Cross without taking the class. You don't need the certificate. And I think you can audit that class for free without getting a certificate. It's really, really worth doing right now. So anyway, those are the stages of a pandemic, of a pestilential breakout that I've noticed just in all of my reading. And I'm a medical history fanatic, so that's just, the things that I've picked up. I'm going to put this in my story. Yeah, everybody's heard wash their hands. Why would you use bleach on gloves before removing them? Just take the fucking gloves off and toss them. They're contaminated. Don't reuse gloves. If you touch something contaminated, the glove is contaminated. Before you touch something you don't want to contaminate, take that glove off and throw it away. Take the gloves off and throw them away. That's literally how you have to use them. You cannot bleach them and reuse them. Taking them off properly is a whole nother thing. Grab the outside. Here, I'll give you a little demonstration. Let's say I'm gloved. They're dirty gloves. I've been in the store. Grab a glove here. You've got both gloves on. Grab the outside. Peel it off. Now you're holding that dirty glove right here in this hand. Take the clean hand underneath the glove. Don't touch the outside. Touch underneath. pull that glove off, and the other glove is inside it. Now you have two dirty gloves with the inside part dirty and the outside part not. Throw it away. It's done. They're dirty, they're contaminated, it's over. Why would you touch your skin with gloves on? Never touch your skin with contaminated gloves on. Bleach or no bleach, if your gloves are contaminated, toss them. Just don't do it. Just please don't do it. You should not be doing it. Once a glove is contaminated, it is contaminated. Just toss it. Just toss it. Wash your hands before you touch your face. You shouldn't be touching your skin with contaminated gloves. Take them off one at a time in a way that doesn't allow your bare skin to touch the outside yucky part of the glove. There's a bunch of videos online actually too about there's totally a bunch of videos online about how to take off dirty gloves. There's been a bunch of like doctors and stuff posting them too. So just if you Google like how to remove surgical gloves, you will find like a ton of videos explaining how to do it so that you're not accidentally touching yourself trying to take them off. It is a lot easier than what you're describing. But yeah, so everybody's heard wash their hands a million times, but it's because soap breaks this down. Using soapy water on something, apparently, is safer than bleaching things. Well, not safer, but more effective. But all of this, again, is up in the air. It's novel. It's new. We don't know. Do everything you can to stay safe. And I'll read in probably about 2 hours or so the next chapter of The Plague. My phone needs to charge for a little while, so I'm just going to put this in the story. And I don't know, maybe I will save it. I don't know. We'll see. And maybe I'll do another one of these in a few days when there's more information out there. If you're a medical worker, thank you. Seriously, I know you guys are like, this thing just loves you and is trying to eat you up, and I hope it doesn't. Everybody else, good luck. Stay home. Sean, you're doing your best. We're all doing our best. All right, goodbye.